next matchup, we have two albums from the same artist. We have Panic at the Disco. I'll be representing Death of a Bachelor.
I'll be representing A Fever You Just Cannot Sweat Out.
Yep. We secretly polled 30 of our friends to see what their favorite albums are and why. We're drafting them into two teams, one represented by Connor and one by myself, Ashir.
Now we've tossed them into a tournament-style bracket to debate and see which of our friends' music taste comes out on top.
We'll be using a set of categories to determine the winner of each round, including production, lyrics, cultural impact, longevity, replay value, and any intangibles that don't fit into these categories.
So without further ado, welcome to Needledrop Knockout, and let's get into today's matchup.
Let's get right into this. Let's start with the production.
Yes.
I think the production on Death of a Bachelor, it's pretty damn solid. It's a really loud and lively album. I think a good amount of the tracks, they really do hit. It's, Panic at the Disco, even though they might have started out as a pop punk album, or pop punk group, sorry, they've definitely evolved their sound a lot throughout the years to the point where they're not just confined to just rock elements. And this album is no exception to that. On this one, there are, a lot of horns and a lot of kind of elements of blues, and he's very clearly trying to go for this Sinatra type of sound. And I think for the most part that really works. A lot of the tracks on here, I know there's a song called LA Devotee, but for a majority of the album, it really feels like I'm going through old-timey New York in a lot of ways. And I think this album's production does a really great job of kind of crafting that sound. I'll admit it's not perfect. There are a few instrumentals like House of Memories, The Good, the Bad, and the Dirty that I feel like don't really fit. They felt like kind of padding, and they don't really fit aesthetically with the rest of the album. But for the most part, this kind of loud, rambunctious sound, while also fitting in these Sinatra type elements, I feel like they do a pretty great job on this album. Whereas A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, I'm not gonna lie, I don't think the production on this album has held up all too great over the years. There's kind of two types of tracks on A Fever, right? There's the more pop punk style, then there's this strange mix of electronic and Europop that's in the latter half of the album, and in my opinion, those have not really aged well. There are moments on the album where that mix does work. I'm gonna highlight Time to Dance because I don't see enough Panic fans talk about that song. That is one of my favorites. But I definitely think the songs that stick to the pop punk sound, they're executed a lot better than some of the, Baroque pop stuff. Just one last point on production for both albums. I want to talk about vocals. Brendon Urie has always had issues with vocals. I think on the first album, right, Fever, he's kind of always in yell mode, and it's to the point where on a good chunk of the tracks, his voice kind of sounds whiny to me. And on Death of a Bachelor, he's still very much being loud, but I think with the context of some of those tracks and how loud the tracks themselves are, and he's also hitting these lower notes a lot of the time. Impossible Year, I think, is one of his best vocal performances in Panic's discography. I think he has more range on this one. So even though you could probably argue if Fever's more innovative in terms of the production, I think Death of a Bachelor's sound holds up better.
So, we had a pretty lengthy discussion about this album in the car. We just listened to it again today together, and couldn't agree more about the Sinatra-esque kind of the vibe. It's very, Gatsby-ian as far as this eccentric, party, loud theme for the first half of the album. It's Death of a Bachelor. The first half of the story is about, a guy being a rambunctious little bachelor. And I agree that a lot of the beats and kind of the music itself is a bit more poppy in a way that does benefit the album. We don't see enough of a shift in either the instrumentals or Brendon Urie's vocals going into the second half of the album for it to carry the themes it's trying to convey correctly. We'll talk about it more during lyrics. But I think the consistency of the production, as far as the sonics and how kind of, boisterous and fun it is not what I would like to see out of them. That being said, very unique sonic landscape, It's poppy, but not many people were playing with the elements that they play with on this album. And just to kind of go to my album now, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, whereas this album does try a couple unique things, but sticks to a mainly formulaic song structure. A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, we just did Folie à Deux before this. You pointed to that album's, diverse sonicscape. That album would not have that sonicscape without A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, I think. A Fever You Can't Sweat Out is a bunch of theater kids, literally, who get into a studio, have a bunch of fucking instruments, start grabbing shit and putting them on songs and seeing if it works, and I think that is to the album's benefit. Pop punk at this point was still, very much in its infancy, but when you look at the first couple albums that came out from this genre, they're all very similar as far as sonics. Little grungy, a little bit, the crunchy. But Panic takes this kind of open approach, this kind of, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but they give the floor to anyone who wants to add something. And it works. It's really interesting. The first half of the album, you're kind of getting this kind of kind of funk pop rock, like punk vibe. Second half, it becomes basically like vaudevillain music, which is fucking awesome. Like, you don't see anything like that done anymore. It's such a diverse sonic landscape, and whereas later albums arguably do it better from other pop punk groups, this is kind of ground zero for a lot of the experimentation the genre has going forward, and I think that it really can't be overlooked.
I definitely agree that it was very unique, especially for the time. They're doing a lot of stuff with genre bending and incorporating all these different elements. I think the way you described it was perfect, actually. It's a bunch of theater kids throwing shit together. But where I disagree is, I actually think it doesn't work a good half of the time. To me, it feels like tracks just get interrupted with some of these elements and kind of ruins the flow of things. And sometimes that might be intentional, sometimes not, but I don't know. I don't think that really works for me. I don't want to reference albums outside of this too much, but you reference Foley's mixing of different elements. I think it was more subtle with how different elements are incorporated while still being distinct. Here, a lot of the sounds, they just clash a little too much. I definitely give it credit for taking a swing with a lot of that stuff, because like you said, a lot of pop punk at the time wasn't really sounding like this, and to be honest, we don't hear a lot now this album either. It's a very unique album, and I give it credit for that, but just sonically, I just don't think it holds up anymore.
I think we find ourselves at kind of the dividing line between the genre. You are listening to it for smooth, poppy beats with instrumentals that are from the pop genre or rock genre. I'm looking at it as punk. When you come onto the scene, this was their first album.
Yeah.
They did everything in their fucking power to punch through what people thought, pop rock was going to be, pop punk was going to be, and they shatter the expectations going forward. This was a debut album. I cannot stress that enough. And what you're missing in albums later on down the road, like Death of a Bachelor, and this is going to be a topic that comes up a lot, is when Brendon Urie is the sole creative voice on an album, you miss a lot of interesting shit. And while Brendon Urie is, he's solid when it comes to singing, he doesn't have the creative spark that Ryan brought to the team. And when you have an album like A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, his contributions to that album are what makes it genuinely stand out amongst the competition. I don't think that if you took Death of a Bachelor and replaced it in the timeline with A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, it would be a great album. It'd be something to get them on the map, but it wouldn't make them be Panic.
I agree that Ryan Ross, I've had this discussion with one of my friends, Renee, so many times. We go back and forth about Ryan Ross all the time. He 100% brought a unique energy to Panic at the Disco, and that energy is absent from most of their music after Pretty Odd. I know this is a hot take amongst Panic fans. I don't think his vision hit 100% of the time either.
I think this is not meant to be an insult. You like pop. You don't like pop punk. You like pop.
Yeah, but it's not even the punk elements on A Fever are good. I don't disagree there. It's the other elements that I think don't work.
But do you get Death of a Bachelor without A Fever You Can't Sweat Out being so sonically diverse and just genuinely a breath of fresh air into a genre that had been somewhat stagnant before?
What do you mean, like?
There was a song structure for pop punk. It was very much similar to the rock structure and the structure we see today, you know, like verse, bridge, hook, bridge, whatever. When Ryan Ross gets his hand on this track, you have the structure, but by throwing in these kind of like exclamation point heads up instrumentals, you always have something new to listen to. You always have something to sink your teeth into on a listen. You listen for a new instrument. You listen for a new bass line. You listen to something that'll stick out every single time. Whereas Death of a Bachelor, you get what you get. The instrumentals do what they do. They fit the theme of the album. They're all in all great instrumentals, but you're not seeing innovation. You're not seeing creativity. You're seeing Brendon Urie taking control of an album and making an album that his voice fits on, that his voice will do good on. It's not a band. It's not Panic at the Disco. It's Brendon Urie and the Disco.
Yeah.
And I think that fucking sucks.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree that is like the situation for both those albums. I just think one's better than the other.
You're picking like white bread is what you're arguing right now. You're picking, yeah, it's passable, yeah, it fits the sonic landscape, they're good instrumentals.
I don't even say passable. I think besides like the two tracks I mentioned that are kind of like skips for me, it's pretty damn good.
It's good. It's just not. It's not pop punk. We're arguing between two of the best. You know, we just finished Foley. That's pop punk.
Yeah.
This, I don't think Death of a Bachelor is pop punk.
No,
I
it's
think
not.
we're arguing. Yeah, we're arguing a punk album against a pop punk.
There are two very different genres. Yeah. Okay, but are we arguing innovation or are we arguing what sounds better?
I'm arguing what the group did best for the group and what is the best thing that they put out. Because these are two Panic albums. That's what we have to argue. It just comes down to, if this was matched up against like a different album by a different artist, you would have a much better case for pushing this album forward. But I think when we're doing Panic on Panic, you have to take the album that made Panic.
Okay. I still maintain the sound of Death of a Bachelor is better and ages well than A Fever, but on the points of like originality and just like genre defining innovation, I'm willing to give it the point for production.
I agree, and I also think a big part of the sound is that at the time they had far less resources during the A Fever You Can't Sweat Out era. There are remastered versions of a lot of the tracks that sound sonically a lot better, and Death of a Bachelor,
I haven't actually listened to those.
They're pretty good. And Death of a Bachelor is like, they had the budget.
Yeah.
And it does sound fantastic. You could bump that in a car speaker. It sounds awesome.
To give him a little bit of credit though, Brendon Urie, a little bit of credit. A lot of the production on this album, yeah, he had help, but he is actually playing a lot of these instruments himself. Just to like put that out there, because I've seen some of the studio sessions from the Death of a Bachelor era. It, like you said, for better or for worse, it's the Brendon Urie show now, and he did put in the work for that. But yeah, I get what you mean.
Are we comfortable giving that point to A Fever?
Yeah, I think so. Let's move on to lyrics. You start.
Okay, I'm gonna consult my notes real quick. So when I went back to A Fever, something that kind of stood out to me is just how kind of witty, sarcastic, fun, and rambunctious the lyrics are as they tell these kind of, short anecdotes or stories. And it kind of sticks out where when you look at Death of a Bachelor, you're getting a more poppy sound. And there are topics that are pop punk in that album. But on A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, you're getting the sarcasm, you're getting the wittiness, you're getting the cuss words and all the fuck you that pop punk, again, is defined by. Now, where I see Death of a Bachelor like coming up a little bit short is Brendon Urie's show. He doesn't have anyone to check him. A lot of the lyrics that are not exactly, smooth or are too blunt in Death of a Bachelor could have been checked by someone like a Ryan Ross. And Ryan Ross is, again, he helped, write and do everything with this album. And you can see his influence and his wit. And Death of a Bachelor doesn't have it. Again, my argument basically is that Death of a Bachelor is Brendon Urie. A Fever You Can't Sweat Out is Panic at the Disco.
Yeah, I can't entirely disagree with you. A lot of the lyrics on A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, like you said, it's very eclectic. It is very punk. Like, even like their biggest hit has that type of writing, and the fact that that managed to break out is pretty great also. The case I make for Death of a Bachelor is it's two entirely different approaches, and that is kind of the conversation with this whole video, right? Is one is very much Panic at the Disco the band, but it is primarily Ryan Ross's voice in that case, and then the other is the Brendon Urie show.
I think that needs to be the conversation.
Yeah, and looking into the background of Death of a Bachelor, a lot of the studio sessions, they were inspired by kind of a new life that Brendon Urie had entered around this time. He had just gotten this house in LA with his wife. He's living this big mainstream life, and he's kind of going nuts with it. And it's very much his voice and vision throughout the album. And I think for the most part, like I said before, there are a few like filler moments, but for the most part, he is telling his, I don't know if story is the right word, but his story of like what's it like living like, a bachelor in this world, like getting overly drunk and like these encounters with women, making the high heels work, don't threaten me with a good time, like, and just like that world of leaving behind the bachelor life and then entering. There's a light shift in like the tone of the lyrics where it becomes more about like the girl in the latter half, which kind of suits the theme of like how he's ending his bachelorhood and getting married finally. It's not like a particularly unique story or voice, but I think the fact that it is one unified voice on the album, it does work really well. On A Fever, they kind of have Fall Out Boy syndrome to me, where they're like Pete Wentz's writing style, where I will say Ryan Ross's writing is better than Pete Wentz's for sure, but it kind of gives me similar vibes of like, we're just like saying a bunch of stuff. Some of it hits, but
Not sure I agree with that. Just, I think, like you said, he does it a lot better. And the lyrics of that album are kind of symptomatic of a lot of the pop punk albums that were coming out at the time. And I think where you find the innovation in the albums on the production and specifically what Ryan Ross is writing. Brendon Urie does provide a more stable through line with the vocals and the writing on this album. And I don't think Brendon Urie's a good writer. A lot of the lyrics are blunt and generic.
It's very basic.
It lacks nuance. It lacks a lot of stuff that Ryan Ross was known for. And at the end of the day, we talked about this on Fully. When you're dealing with an album about celebrity or about emotions or about, anything that you should be taking seriously, you need a Donnie. You need a How to Disappear Completely. You need a Sing About Me. You need a turning point song where it goes from, just an album where you're talking about something to showing the emotional, vulnerable core. And you can argue that this album has that towards the end, Death of a Bachelor, but it's not good. It's not particularly good. This album at the end of the day is about growing up. And House of Memories is probably the most emotional song on this. And it's not an emotional song.
Yeah, no, I don't think there are any exceptional lyrical moments on Death of a Bachelor or most of Panic's albums, honestly. I was prepared to give this category up to A Fever from the beginning, but I think he definitely strengthened.
I think I shit on it, which is kind of what it's doing.
Yeah, because like going into it, like I'll be honest, A Fever, Ryan Ross's writing, it has the wit, it has some memorable moments, but I still don't care for it ultimately in a lot of his songs. This is more so, it's not like I don't have like an issue with it or anything, especially with A Fever. I kind of have an issue with how people rave about it when it comes to Pretty Odd, but that's a separate video if we were going to do that. But no, I agree. Lyrics, A Fever takes the crown there.
Thank you.
Speaking of taking the crown, A Fever does take it for cultural impact. I don't think there's any arguing that. I will make one caveat to that though. 80% of the cultural impact of a fever goes to one song. It goes to I Write Sins Not Tragedies.
I think that's a big part of it. Don't think it's the only thing.
It's the majority of it. Because, like, think of other pop punk albums at the time. Like, we talked about, like, early Fall Out Boys, their first two albums.
We just had this conversation about it.
Yeah, you think about Welcome to the Black Parade. Those had multiple hits that have carried through. On a Fever, what else is there besides I Write? I'm not saying I Write Sins is the only good song, but what other impactful songs came out of that? What other hits were there?
The only difference between Martyrdom and Suicide is Press Coverage is a massive song. It doesn't hold up today, I'll give you that.
Time to Dance should be one.
Lying is the most fun a girl can have without taking her clothes off is a massive, great pop punk song. Well, like, those three are probably the ones I'd pick. Thank God for Esteban is really good. I don't think it's like a cultural impact song though.
Lying definitely gets. I think that's the closest to like a second one from that one. But I still it was that aesthetic of like the I Write Sins Not Tragedies music video. That's iconic. Death of a Bachelor doesn't really have any of those. It was a big album when it came out. It had singles, but none of those singles still get played today. I hear LA Devotee sometimes when I'm out and about, but
what it comes down to is that if we're talking cultural impact, it's gonna be Fever. If we're talking about chart dominance, it's gonna be Death of a Bachelor.
Yeah.
Because it did have a lot of hits on it, but it didn't have any impact. It's kind of fallen off. It's been neutered over time.
Honestly, and this is Brendon Urie's own fault. Honestly, people talk about Panic in general a lot anymore, but when it does come up, Fever comes up way more.
Which leads us not in a cultural impact, but longevity. And you just said that album gets brought up more. Therefore, Fever wins longevity.
Yep, I can't even argue.
Replay value. I'll cede this to Death of a Bachelor.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I enjoy it. If I could pick, I'm more likely to grab a song off Death of a Bachelor, play it, and enjoy it than I am off Fever.
I will say, like a lot of these pop punk bands, a majority of my time listening to them was in middle school and early high school. I still kept up with like some of them like throughout the last couple of years, but I do remember, even though I was never the biggest fan of a Fever when I was getting into all these bands, there were certain tracks that I replayed the shit out of. I'm gonna again hype up Time to Dance. I don't know what it is about that song. I really love that song, but definitely Death of a Bachelor has a ton of replayability. I've gone back, even though I like never go back to this album as much anymore. LA Devotee has remained in constant rotation for me. That's a great song.
I think it comes also down to the replay value, not only for us but for the general people.
Oh, yeah,
and Death of a Bachelor. I mean, if I could pick like any song off both these albums to listen to just at any given time, and I'll give the lyrics for it, and you guys can know what song it is because I have to mention the lyrics. Is it still me that makes you sweat? Am I who you think about in bed? It's like, yeah, Brendon Urie, that's you. But I mean, the highs are high on Fever, but it doesn't have like the through staying power of Death of a Bachelor. So, point for Death of a Bachelor, granted.
And that's the only point it's gonna get.
I'll be honest, it's a pity point. I think Intangibles get washed too. You have a great come-up story from Panic at the time. You have everything about the studio session. Going back to my argument for Igor had such a great aesthetic and vibe as a concept album. If Urie put any effort into making a vibe for that album, it could have won this category. Like, imagine like a stage performance that's Gatsby based. It has all this like Art Deco shit. But end of the day, it's a 5-1 win for a Fever you can't sweat out.
Yeah.
I feel like this was going to be the outcome.
Yeah, I can't be mad about it. I knew that coming.
It's hard to argue against it. I mean, it's the same band, but it's kind of a different weight class. But we had to, sort out Panic versus Panic before we get into the deep of it.
You know, a much more interesting Panic v Panic would have been Pretty Odd versus Vices and Virtues.
Okay.
That would be a great battle. I've had that battle before.
That'd be great. Unfortunately, that's not what our friends put in.
Yeah. Do better, guys.
Yeah, do better. But that'll be this video, I think.
Yeah.
So far, it's 2-0 me. Put that up on the board. My drafting skills are far superior to Ashir's. And that's not going to be any different for the rest of the show. He is Brendon Urie. I'm Ryan Ross.
I'm not Brendon Urie.
He's Brendon Urie.
I'm not Brendon Urie.
Cut.